Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech.
You're listening to So to Speak, the free speech podcast, brought to you by FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression.
All right, folks, welcome back to So to Speak, the free speech podcast, where every other week we take an uncensored look at the world of free expression through the law, philosophy, and stories that define your right to free speech. Today, we're looking at the story that's captured the headlines involving Mahmoud Khalil. And to do so, we are joined by Marc Randazza, who is a First Amendment attorney with Randazza Legal Group. Marc, welcome back onto the show.
Thank you. Yeah, I love being on the show.
We also have a new guest who I hope will love being on the show as well. Jeffrey Rubin is an immigration attorney with Rubin Pomerleau in Boston. Jeff, welcome onto the show.
Thank you, Nick, for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, so let's set the scene a little bit. Mahmoud Khalil is a green card holder who was detained around 8:30 p.m. on Saturday, March 8th. He was quickly moved to Jena, Louisiana. And according to the notice to appear document, which I'm holding in my hands right now from the Department of Homeland Security, he is being sent to Jena, Louisiana for deportation under the Immigration and Nationality Act, which allows the Secretary of State to deport someone if they believe that the individual's presence or activities in the United States would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. So why are they going after Mahmoud Khalil? Why is this something that is capturing headlines? Well, he was involved in the Colombia protests, which have a mix of unprotected, unlawful conduct, such as vandalism, building occupations, and whatnot, and lawful speech. And sorting out who is responsible for what is very difficult. But in the Khalil affair, you look at the statements from the government officials justifying his arrest and detention, and you have Marco Rubio saying that we're revoking the visas and green cards of Hamas supporters in America so they can be deported. President Trump hailed the arrest of Khalil, saying, "We know there are more students at Columbia and other universities across the country who have engaged in pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic, anti-American activity, and the Trump administration will not tolerate it." The press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, said,
"This is an individual who organized group protests that not only disrupted college campus classes and harassed Jewish American students and made them feel unsafe on their own college campus, but also distributed pro-Hamas propaganda, flyers with the logo of Hamas."
I've been doing some research on Khalil, and it's kind of unclear what role he had in the protests. I believe he was a mediator or negotiator between the university and the student groups, the coalition of student groups that partook in the encampment. He also obviously had some sympathies for the encampment and the post-October 7th protests that he would describe as pro-Palestinian. Marco Rubio and the Trump administration clearly are calling them pro-Hamas. But the justifications obviously raise First Amendment questions, free speech questions. What are the rights of foreign nationals in this country, lawful permanent residents with green cards? So we're going to try and unpack that all here. That's why we've got a First Amendment attorney. That's why we've got an immigration attorney. But Marc, I maybe want to start with you.
Yeah.
What are you looking at from a First Amendment perspective?
Well, to start off, these are my irony pills that I was going to take, like extra of them, because if you take what the government, this conservative government is saying, this sounds like woke ass bullshit from campuses over the past generation. They don't, look, I get it. And let me also set the stage with saying, I despise this Khalil guy. I despise anybody who has any support for Hamas. I sit around a table of Jews, and I am the one who's more pro-Israel than any of them. I get yelled at by them for being too pro-Israel. But from a free speech perspective, this is chilling. I mean, this is a guy who we let in the country, and maybe we shouldn't have. This is a guy we gave a green card to. Maybe we shouldn't have. But having made those mistakes, he is now afforded due process. He is now afforded First Amendment rights. So with him being here, for the government to say that the thing we have against him is that he supports a movement we don't like and that he's engaged in protests that we don't like, I can't think of anything less American.
Well,
Accuse
Jeff,
the guy of jaywalking, for God's sakes. Accuse the guy of something unlawful, even if it doesn't fit the facts. Because if the government had a fact that was more than protest, wouldn't they put it out there?
well, Jeff, can they deport this guy for good reason or no reason? I mean, what is the law as applied to someone in his situation with a green card?
Right. Let's go right to the statute. Serious adverse foreign policy consequences.
Now, that's to get rid of them, right, Jeff?
Right. And by the way, I was raised Jewish, both parents. I was bar mitzvah in 1983. I have been an immigration attorney. I fell right into the field right as it became sort of a new interpretation of a new statute at the time. It was 1996. This IRA came out. It was a big bill signed by Bill Clinton. And I got into immigration right around 1998. And this, to me, is a first impression. This is the first time I've seen anything like this. The last time I saw anything like this was maybe the special registration against Muslim people after post 9/11. But again, this was not applied to lawful permanent residents. Here's the difference here is that this gentleman is a lawful permanent resident, meaning that he has already been vetted and screened, and certainly there are three bodies of immigration law. There's citizenship, there's admissibility, and then there's removability. We're dealing with removability here. They could have a suspicion that you're selling drugs and deny you a green card. They can deny you citizenship if you say I'm a communist or I support totalitarianism or terrorism. But here's a lawful permanent resident. You are demonstrating an intent to reside in the United States permanently. Certainly a green card could be taken away if you show an intent not to reside here permanently. You're outside of the country for more than a year, or you're just only in the United States for 1 day of a year. You're not showing an intent to be here all the time. If you commit certain crimes and you're convicted, then those are also grounds for removability. So just looking right at the law, you have to have been selling drugs, possessing certain drugs, be engaged in acts of violence, and been convicted. And there's been lots of different definitions of that. Now here, what would be the reasonable ground to believe that he would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences? Well, just getting students on a campus to voice their opinion or freedom of assembly or freedom of speech and protest, something that they view to be too many innocent civilians dying on one side, or Israel reacting to the October 7th events with too much force, or not doing it in a way that would spare more civilian lives. I don't see how this gets to foreign policy consequences.
Right. Even if he was let's make it even more offensive. Let's say he was protesting saying, North Korea should rule the United States because they have a better system. Hail Juche. Or, even if he was a Nazi, for God's sake. It seems to me problematic if that's all you've got. And there is a First Amendment interplay here, right? Like Kleindist versus Mandel was a 1972 Supreme Court case where they didn't want to let a Belgian Marxist into the country on a visa. Now, it's one thing to say, and the First Amendment did not, as a 6-3 decision, saying that the First Amendment doesn't guarantee the right to compel admission of a foreign national into the country. So we can have a membrane that you can't get through with certain ideas or certain things that might be protected as First Amendment protected speech once you got here. But that's to break through that outer shell. But once you're through the shell, Bridges versus Wixon was a Supreme Court case in 1945 where they wanted to deport an Australian immigrant who was affiliated with the Communist Party. And we're talking 1945, a darn good time to throw communists out of the United States. But even then, they said you couldn't deport him because legal resident aliens possess First Amendment rights to free speech and free press, and deporting him solely on guilt by association without any evidence of personal involvement in illegal activities is unconstitutional. We haven't overruled that. So this is inconsistent with Bridges versus Wixon, but it's just inconsistent with what we are as a people.
Jeff, I want to step back and ask you about the distinction between two things that Marc was talking about: someone who wishes to get into the country and someone who is already here. You were saying earlier that it sounds like if you're here and you're either a student visa holder or a green card holder, to get deported, typically what needs to happen is you need to be charged and convicted with a crime.
Right. So a student visa is temporary. And that's what Secretary of State Rubio relied upon in his compelling, to many people, discussion of why the government's doing this. They said if we knew before he came in he was going to be riling up people, preventing Jewish students from attending classes, getting everybody into a tiff about Hamas and promoting propaganda about Hamas, we wouldn't have let him into the country. Now, that is true, that there's wide discretion and there's a lot more grounds to deny somebody to be here temporarily. The issue here is, once here permanently, why wouldn't you get the full protections of the Constitution? If you're going to be in a place that celebrates all of these freedoms through our U.S. Constitution, you're going to be here permanently. So I do think that it is a slippery slope. It is very alarming if that's all it is. I'd love to see what the government has to offer beyond being present at protests, or, as you say, being a go-between between the students and the administrators, or even handing out leaflets or so forth that support his position. I thought that maybe there would be some sort of financial connection. There is a terrorism bar, materially supporting terrorism, but again, that is also for admissibility. But I certainly could be logically extended to somebody being removed. But I don't see any evidence that there was any financial support, any attempts to engage in any actual warfare or activity here that supports Hamas. I think that the words pro-Hamas are thrown around, but I know that from people that object to innocent civilian dying in any war or any situation. They're not necessarily pro whatever group happens to be governing that country. So there is a huge difference between protesting, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and actually participating and supporting and being in the way of some foreign policy approach from the U.S. government.
I was looking at some stuff over the weekend. People were throwing out different green card holders or individuals here on visas, people like John Oliver or Christopher Hitchens or Jordan Peterson, for example, who are very public. They speak out. They come to America. They're public intellectuals. Charlie Cook, even from National Review, he's now a citizen, but was previously a green card holder, who you can only imagine if you're one of these individuals and you're contrary to the administration. If you're Christopher Hitchens, contrary to the Clinton administration, for example, in the 90s, how you might, seeing this precedent play out, keep your mouth shut. But I wanted to ask you, Jeff, because this is something that's also going around a lot, that he lied on his application.
And if you tell us when you apply for a visa, I'm coming to the U.S. to participate in pro-Hamas events, that runs counter to the foreign policy interest of the United States of America. It's that simple. So you lied. You came. If you had told us that you were going to do that, we never would have given you the visa. Now you're here. Now you do it. So you lied to us. You're out.
Now, I had looked at what I had seen floating around on the internet, some of these green card applications, and I hadn't seen anything that had matched the language endorse or espouse terrorist activity. I had seen a lot of questions that related to things that are more like material support, like financial.
Okay, but Nick, you have a copy of the notice to appear.
I do.
Yeah,
They're not citing any of that.
So read to us. Where does it say that he's been involved in a misrepresentation? Because that's always on the notice to appear. That's a very easy one to put down there. You misrepresented material facts when you applied to either have your visa or student visa, or when you applied for lawful permanent residence. And so there are waivers for that. That's not on there. That's not on there.
The one thing that makes us truly exceptional as a country is our commitment to wide open and robust debate. And I want this guy thrown out of the country. Like, I'm thrilled with the idea of this guy getting sent to Gaza and let him go live in the filth of Gaza. I want him gone. I would love to see when these people are blocking the entrances to buildings, 1960s style police coming in with truncheons beating them. Love to see it.
So
but
Mark,
you know what?
Yep.
But you know what? I'm not willing to give up what it is to be America for that. I'm allowed to have those emotions. I have those emotions. But then what kicks in is I'm a goddamn American. And if the first thing you ought to think is when you want to, if you start feeling that way, you better check yourself. Take a look at the First Amendment and say, what am I willing to surrender to get rid of these people that I dislike? And, when people are saying, well, he's an alien, he doesn't have these rights. Well, first of all, he does. But if he doesn't, well, why don't we experiment with an amendment that, is not so damn important? Like, let's go stick some troops to go live with green card holders and see how the Third Amendment holds up. Because, if we're just going to put a couple of sergeants on your couch for a few days, and we'll see if they have Third Amendment rights, they have First Amendment rights, right? I mean, we can't do unlawful search and seizure on people. We don't deprive them of counsel. We don't deprive them of due process. Everybody gets due process. Everybody gets freedom of speech here. Everyone, no matter how gross you are. NAMBLA gets to have freedom of speech here. So why shouldn't this jerk off?
And by the way, Mark, there is some things out there saying that he shared Sabbath dinners with Jewish people. He was participating in the Passover Seder. He was not accused of any other crimes. That's why we want to be careful to be xenophobic here. I think that the one of the first clients I had back in around 2005 was a Palestinian, not recognized by the U.S. government as that, recognized as being stateless. I mean, he did have Jordanian citizenship, but was here, had violated a technical part of his visa, and they did the same thing, locked him up, looked to remove him, and essentially all he had was an asylum claim. He wasn't a lawful permanent resident, so it was actually somewhat understandable. But the guy ended up being a researcher for rheumatology for kids at Children's Hospital and had published articles. And the immigration judge, when the Homeland Security prosecutor came right out, and I tried to point these things out, that this is who he is, and there was an objection made because we just want to, blanket have opinions about people based on their religion or part of the world they're from. Said, is this the type of person we really want to deport? And, there are many, many people from Syria and the Middle East that are extremely important members of our society, citizens, doctors, researchers. But all that being said, what does it take to get deported? I guess that's all it takes, is to show up at a school and say, you know what, I don't like the fact that so many people are dying in a war that the U.S. is involved with. And since I don't agree with what the current president has to say about certainly we all want Jewish people respected, and we want to celebrate Judaism. I am Jewish. I went to a Purim party on this past Friday night. We don't want Jewish people harassed. We don't want Jewish people to feel uncomfortable. I don't want anti-Semitism to proliferate. But sometimes I think that maybe this is the flip side of all of this. If you're going to be this heavy-handed with somebody just voicing an opinion, is this going to exacerbate anti-Semitism? Is it going to, in the future,
good point,
make it easier to deport people who just simply disagree with?
That's a great point. Because when you got to, I argue this with about hate speech issues with my European friends. I teach a freedom of expression course in Italy every year, and I cannot drill it through the heads of people there, no matter how hard I try, that at some point, you have to, trying to ban some kind of speech ennobles it. Hitler was not allowed to speak in Weimar Germany. Goebbels used that as a justification. It almost romanticized Hitler's speeches. He put out a poster that said, 2 billion people, which was the population of the planet at the time, can speak in Germany, but not this man. Why do you think that is? And when we actually take something that, take a point of view that really, I'd rather see us make fun of it than ban it. You ennoble it. Where is there more anti-Semitism? Europe or here? Because it's banned in Europe. It's illegal in Europe. But I'd say, I'd way rather walk down the street in the United States with a name like Rubin than down the streets of Malmo or down the streets of Paris, or even, much to my chagrin, I don't, I'm also an Italian citizen. I don't think we're doing a very good job of policing anti-Semitism in Italy, despite the fact that, you got carabinieri surrounding every synagogue to try to protect them. We are doing a much better job in the United States of policing hate speech than they are in places where they actually police hate speech.
Well, you mentioned that it's very hard for you to get it through Italians' head, the harms in policing hate speech and how it has this boomerang effect. It backfires, it creates a Streisand effect.
Yeah.
It becomes that poison fruit, so to speak.
Yeah, it becomes punk rock, kind of.
But yeah, I guess. But here in the United States, just watching the conversation surrounding the Khalil affair unfold, it seems like what Americans just don't understand is why someone who's not a citizen of this country would be bestowed with constitutional rights. I happen to think that the Declaration of Independence was correct, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And core to liberty is freedom of speech. And
I love that.
If you view freedom of speech as a fundamental human right,
yes,
you cannot deny it to someone, regardless of their citizenship status, to the extent you are subject to the jurisdiction of the country, which is bound to respect it. And so,
I think, preach, brother.
But then I just have this whole body of immigration law that I'm looking at. I'm watching the conversation unfold around. You have different requirements for applicants, and then once you're here, maybe there's like different requirements for visa holders and green card holders.
Well, that is a great point. It highlights that there is a lot of illogical, nonsensical, contradictory immigration laws. They write statutes, they write regulations. They don't agree with each other. They propose a statute like this to simply let the Secretary of State determine what makes it seriously adverse to foreign policy. So that is why I've had some fun for the past 27 years, and why it's so easy sometimes to litigate in the federal court. And we even had a case go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court 2018, which turned immigration law on its head for a while. It was basically statutory. They were supposed to put some information on the piece of paper to start the deportation process, the time and date of the first court hearing. And, immigration officials act unreasonably and illogically all the time. That results in these draconian consequences, like people getting deported. Not putting the date and time on a piece of paper to start the deportation process. Well, they'd mail you the date and time years later when the people had moved or couldn't find it. And then they say, well, you're deported and we're just going to grab you and toss you out of the country. So this to me just seems more proof that they don't want immigration laws necessarily to be taken seriously. To your point, Nick, when you step over the border from Mexico with just whatever you have on your back, you're supposed to be accorded the protections of the Constitution. I think it was John Ashcroft who said back in the mid-2000s that they should not have constitutional protections. And that was a decision that he made simply as the Attorney General at the time. These unilateral decisions that are made all the time by Attorney Generals. And that was actually struck down.
And let's change the Constitution,
Right, right.
If you want me to support an amendment that says, if you've come across the border illegally, you don't get constitutional protections, I'll vote for it. But until we change it, it's got to be more than just words on paper. The Soviet Constitution protected freedom of speech and freedom of conscience better than the United States Constitution did if you just looked at the words. But in practice, it didn't work that way. And Scalia taught my con law class one day and gave a beautiful lecture on that I'll never reproduce. But he talked about how it's got to be more than just words on paper. So They have due process. They have free speech rights. This is something that happens the moment you set foot on American soil. And that's the great thing about it. We can look at people like Hamas and say, no, the way that you run your place sucks. The way that we run our country. This is the superiority of our system, that we can tolerate dissent, that would get you thrown off a roof in Gaza, or get you thrown in jail in Korea, or in North Korea. Hell, even in South Korea, it might get you thrown in jail. So this is the majesty of it. This is why I choose to protect this Constitution and not my other Constitution, which happens to be the Italian Constitution. Let somebody else do that job.
Jeff?
Yeah, well, when you start pushing students, when you start, harassing students, that now you're committing crimes, right? So how about charge them, as you alluded to before, with a crime first, be convicted of that crime, and then, have him removed for that. But when you start getting into this just broad approach of, well, we're now the thought police, we're now the, we're going to say you can't even speak out about something that the U.S. disagrees with. It does. It's chilling, and it's meant to chill. The Muslim travel ban, was meant to chill. This is meant to chill, and that is, the problem with this administration is that there's a chill being placed on the First Amendment, and it seems to me that the First Amendment is only for certain people and not for everybody, and that is not the value our country was founded upon.
So, Jeff, am I right then, to kind of close out here, that when you're taking immigration clients and they get one of these notices to appear and they're going to be deported, that they're charged with a crime, typically?
Yes, absolutely. Or what you alluded to earlier, there may have been a misrepresentation on that green card application. There may be something that they found out that made them ineligible.
But that would be on the notice to appear, right?
Yeah, if he lied, Jeff, that's how I'm curious about.
They can amend it, but it's got to be there.
Can they go back and say, now I'm not saying there's any evidence of this, but when this guy came into the country, if he was lying on his application, can you then revoke his status because of that?
If it was willful and material, he intended to do it, and it actually mattered. It couldn't just be something that they pick out of the sky, but it actually mattered to eligibility. Then sure,
right? Okay,
again, we're not seeing that on that notice. So when it comes to immigration stuff, this is the guy I call, because he's the only immigration lawyer I know that's done a Supreme Court case on immigration law. He's forgotten more about it than I'll ever know. But so what I'm learning from you today is there's two things. There's one, if you're going to let him in, there is that shell, and we could go back and retroactively say you lied, but it's got to be a material lie, and he had to have known it at the time. So for all we know, he came into the United States full of stars and stripes and and eagle screams, and then landed here and all of a sudden fell in with a bad crowd and started thinking otherwise. Well, or October 7th happened. It was a horrible, miserable day for Jews and for Israel, of course, and then
for the whole world.
And then the Israeli government reacted, and then he takes issue with whether the Israeli military should be going into schools or hospitals if they're being used as human shields, and but here's the thing: we're going to deport people for just simply staging a protest, and even if we disagree.
But Jeff, the other wing of this is we can throw you out. Now, set aside, I may jump in as a First Amendment lawyer and say we shouldn't be able to, but we can throw you out if you do something that I think you said serious adverse foreign policy consequences.
Right. So
you're right. But every word there has to be doing work. I mean, it's serious adverse foreign policy consequences.
This seems to be extremely broad. And what happens to overly broad statutes? Are they enforced?
Hey, well, it all depends on the politics of the federal judge and the politics of the other party nowadays.
They get
I'm
struck
sorry.
down.
Yeah.
So
depends.
this kid's not, this guy, I don't know how old, I guess he's in his 20s, could be. But I don't see how this passes the muster.
Yeah.
I don't see how this example is what, and I don't understand why the government would want to use this as the example to meet this this very obscure statute. I think it's going to be a much higher burden.
I think when they arrested him, they thought he was just on a student visa.
No,
and then they arrived at his door and he says, I'm a green card holder. And I guess he got his green card according to the notice to appear in November of 2024. So fairly recent, but you would imagine, okay, so you get your student visa before you arrive at Columbia. He graduates from Columbia in December of 2024. So he's had the student visa for a while, presumably before October 7th. October 7th happens in 2020.
You don't get a green card that fast, right?
Yeah, but then presumably before they give him the green card, they're looking into him, right? Like if there's, or is it just whatever's on the application?
No, in the prior administration, probably not. They probably were like, "This is great. We want more of these kinds of douchebags." But the thing is, having let him in, we gotta treat him with constitutional respect.
Well, we'll let Jeff get in here, like on that process.
Right. Yeah, no, the process takes typically years. I mean, if you look at the processing time for 45, which is the form you use to get a green card, then that is taken at least a year and a half. They take fingerprints. Often there's an interview. And at the interview, there's many questions asked on that form. And he was fully vetted. There was absolutely nothing that they had on him before they gave him a green card, or certainly they would have sought to deny him green card. I see people denied green cards all the time for the most minimal of behavior. Shoplifting a $5 pack of gum. This was a long process. But more than that, it does just chill me as a immigration attorney. Just when I thought I'd seen it all, here comes this. And so, what do you advise the client?
I was just going to ask you that. Without revealing any particular attorney-client advice, are you finding yourself advising your clients that maybe they got to be more careful about what they say, or did you advise them about that before?
Well, there's been all sorts of nonsensical approaches since Trump took office. People traveling with green cards are supposed to be let back in are now getting detained for hyper-technical, what they view. It's not even a violation. They're just making a stretch to say there's been violations because maybe your green card is under review at the immigration court, like you said, due process, but ignoring due process, saying, hey, the fact that it's even under review, we're going to take you into custody and not let you into the country. But here, much different. I can't find myself with any logic to advise anybody of anything. The other alarming aspect is they took him into custody and moved him down, as you said, to Louisiana, to a remote place, something that I usually see reserved for people who have been convicted of selling large amounts of fentanyl or committing acts of violence, like attempted murder or, gun violations that, would have been considered serious by the government.
To move him to Louisiana or to move him at all?
Just to even arrest him. I mean, really?
Okay.
Like, what is the ground for, so to be arrested, they have to show that he's a flight risk or danger to the community. So again, are we getting into this danger to the community because he's speaking? So
I got a problem with that too. Okay, so again, this is where I'm ignorant and why you're here.
And where's the flight risk? He's married to a U.S. citizen. She's 8 months pregnant. And again, I don't know him. I don't know what more the government is going to allege. Certainly, we don't want to promote anti-Semitism in this country. I grew up supporting Israel and all of Judaism. That being said, I have many friends who are not Jewish, maybe Christian, Muslim, what have you. We know that there's a lot of different sides to this situation in the Middle East that's gone on for thousands of years. It really is just, it feels just contrary to everything I've seen as an immigration attorney in 27 years. And
wouldn't it just be such
the bar be higher?
The jurisdiction question is interesting. So he is arrested, and apparently he's brought to he's brought to the federal center, I guess, in Manhattan, but then transported over to New Jersey, and then transported to Louisiana. So
slick.
The habeas corpus petition was filed in the Second Circuit, because that's where he was living, and that's where the notice to appear comes from, 26 Federal Plaza, New York, New York. But at the time the habeas petition was filed, which I think was like 4:40 a.m. on March 9th, he was arrested at 8:30 p.m. on March 8th. He was actually in New Jersey, which is outside the Second Circuit. And so now there's this jurisdictional question. And then he was transferred to Louisiana, and there's speculation he was transferred to Louisiana for one and or two reasons. One being that's the last place you go before you get deported, or two, which is it's in the Fifth Circuit, and they'd get better court precedent in the Fifth Circuit.
We'll have to save this for another podcast, but this is when I first started practicing back in 1998. There was one detention center up in New Hampshire, which had a very small amount of people. And of course, detention tactics have been have exploded. And these are administrative laws. This is an administrative body of law, the immigration law. I don't think it was intended to be used in such a criminal way. And this is the mojo sometimes of immigration officials to move them around from state to state to avoid the jurisdictional application of federal law in that particular state. So, this is exactly intentional. And we've seen it over and over. We've had to fight many jurisdictional issues during COVID. For example, there was immigration court hearings from Virginia by video, and they tried to apply that law to all the people that are up here in Boston, and we had to fight for that. And this has been going on for many years. But I think that the immigration laws maybe need to be rewritten more consistent with a criminal code in mind. My prediction is that he's not deported. But what do you think, Mark?
I mean, I play one position, and it's the First Amendment guy. And I want to at least see everybody who gets deported to have done something to warrant it. It's not just First Amendment.
But what is that
Amendment
something?
Due process.
Do we
anything?
have?
I'll take anything that you say fits the standard. So
right, that's why we're a country of laws, right? So it's a rule of law.
Right. So when somebody comes to me, and they say, "Hey, we're going to put you in charge of whether we deport somebody or not," my first question is going to be, Jeff, does it meet the standard? And if you say, yes, it meets the standard, historically this has happened. We've thrown people out for this in the past. This isn't new.
Right.
Then I'm gonna say, okay, but does it comport with the First Amendment? And in this situation, I see us having, this seems to fail the logic gate at two junctures. Juncture one, you can't come up with in 27 years of practice, and then I presume practicing for 27 years, you have a wealth of knowledge going back at least 75 years of how these laws have been applied. And you can't come up with a single example of this happening before.
Right.
Well, I think more is going to come out about this case. It's going through the courts. I was listening to something on the radio from another immigration attorney talking to Bloomberg saying there's like 12 different constitutional issues at play, perhaps, in this one case. But in the meantime, Mark and Jeff, I appreciate you both taking the time to speak with us today.
Appreciate you and appreciate all that FIRE does. You guys are simultaneously, right-wing slaves and left-wing slaves by everybody, which means you're right in the right spot and doing everything right. So it's anything I can ever do for FIRE. You got it.
I appreciate it, Mark. And Jeff,
thank you for having
again.
me. Thank you for having me.
That's Marc Randazza, who is a First Amendment attorney with Randazza Legal Group, and Jeffrey Rubin, who is an immigration attorney with Rubin, Pomerleau in Boston. I am Nico Perino, and this podcast is recorded and edited by a rotating roster of my FIRE colleagues, including Sam Lee, Aaron Reese, and Chris Maltby. It is co-produced by Sam Lee. To learn more about So to Speak, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel or Substack page, both of which feature video versions of this conversation. You can follow us on X by searching for the handle Free Speech Talk, and you can send feedback, if you have it, to sotospeak@thefire.org. Again, that is sotospeak@thefire.org. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts or Spotify work. Reviews help us attract new listeners to the show. And until next time, I thank you all again for listening.